Hi, my name's Jacqui Dearden. I'm the Schools Liaison Officer at St Peter's College, which is one of the colleges that make up the University of Oxford. My contact details are on this slide and will also be repeated at the end. So I just want to say, if anything crops up in this talk which provokes questions, or if there are any other questions you think I might be able to help with, please do drop me an email and I'd be really delighted to try and help. This is a short talk aimed at Year 12 students, and that's partly because the summer term, which you would be going into after the Easter break, is a really good time for Year 12s to be thinking about starting to prepare for applying to universities. It is also, however, because this year's Year 12s are in the really unusual position of having a lot more time on their hands than they perhaps expected to, being at home rather than being in the classroom. So I was talking to some teachers about the fact that this could be quite a good opportunity for Year 12 students to be spending some time doing, reading, exploring, learning, thinking in ways that could stand them in good stead for preparing really strong applications to universities in the autumn term. The term competitive universities is one I'm using here really just to refer to those universities that have particularly good reputations for their teaching and learning and research, and that are perhaps the hardest to gain admission into. It's the case that any university will enable you to graduate and get a degree, but some universities do have slightly more competitive entry requirements, which can mean that you need to work that bit harder to make sure you really demonstrate to them why they should be taking your application seriously. If you're thinking about applying to competitive universities, a term that you might become familiar with is the Russell Group. The Russell Group is a set of 24 institutions that group themselves on the basis that they pride themselves on maintaining exceptionally high standards of research as well as teaching and learning. It should be said that there are lots of excellent universities that aren't in that group. The Russell Group has put together a website which you might find helpful. It's called Informed Choices, and it gives you advice and guidance and signposting based either on the basis that you aren't sure what degree you would like to study, or that you do think you know what you want to study. You can enter on either platform, and it will help steer you through some really useful information. Something else you'll be hearing a lot about in the coming months is UCAS. UCAS is the Universities and Colleges Admissions Service, and they process all university applications in the UK. So I've taken us here to their search tool just by way of an example. If you were interested in studying French, let's say, but you wanted to do a bit of research now in the coming weeks and months around the different types of French courses there are and where they can be studied, this is showing you every course that's running or that will be running for entry this year. That involves French. So you can see these are French combined courses where it's something and French, and that's at the University of Aberdeen. The listings come up alphabetically, so you're moving down here from Aberdeen to Aberystwyth, Aston University in Birmingham, Bangor, and you can see the different kinds of courses that involve French that are being offered by those different institutions. You can then click on any one of those and have a look at the entry criteria and the details of the course. This deadline here, the 15th of January, is the deadline for which almost all applications need to be made, but there is an exception to that, and that exception includes applications to Oxford, to Cambridge, and for almost all medicine, dentistry and vet science courses. So I'll say more about the earlier deadline for those exceptions in just a moment. As I've mentioned Oxford and Cambridge, Oxbridge is another term you might come across. It's just a made-up word that combines Oxford and Cambridge, There is no such thing as Oxbridge, but it's a way of just referring to those two because they are the oldest universities in the country. So I mentioned that the deadline is different for Oxford and Cambridge. The deadline to submit your application to Oxford or Cambridge or for medicine, dentistry and vet sciences is the 15th of October. And when you consider that we're in April now, you can see that actually this could be quite a good time to be starting to think about your application, because although we advise that you start working on it from June, that's in ordinary circumstances. Seeing as you are now at home and maybe have a bit more time to be exploring things yourself, starting a couple of months early could just give you a really good head start and enable you to feel a bit less stressed about it in the autumn term when hopefully things resume. So first thing to be thinking about would be your personal statement, which I'll say more about in a bit. Your personal statement, I would ordinarily advise that you write over the summer your first draft of, so that you can then chat to your teacher about it or teachers about it when you get back to school or college in the autumn. Then you could also be doing a bit of research about whether, if you're applying to Oxford or Cambridge, you need to take a test, and that's dependent on which subject you're applying for. Tests are part of the routine for almost all academic subjects. If I look at, for example, history, do I need to do a test for history? Yeah, it's the HAT, the History Aptitude Test, and if you then click on that link, every department page will give you similar advice about how you register, when you take the test, but perhaps I'll say a bit more about those things, but perhaps most usefully from the department, how do I prepare? So it's telling you here that there's a webinar on admissions tests and assessment that you can look at, and that there's a video where first year students discuss a particular question from an old HAT paper. And also you can see that there are past papers and mark schemes there that you could be looking at. Something else that you might want to research is whether your course requires you to send in written work. Again, it's something that you can find out more about on the Oxford website if you're thinking of applying to Oxford. So do I need to send written work? So let's say you want to study music. Yes, you do need to submit some written work, and then you can click on the department page and it will explain to you what you will need to submit. If you were interested in physics, no written work required. So the tests and the written work are something you could be doing a little bit of research into now if you wanted to. You have plenty of time before either of those things would be relevant. But doing a little bit of early research can make you feel just that bit more confident and clued up about stuff. The interviews don't happen until December, but it's worth saying now that if you are able to spend a bit of time widening your own knowledge and understanding and thinking about your chosen subject, it's possible that that will really help you when you get to interview, if you're called to interview after these stages, because that could be stuff you could be having interesting conversations with the tutors about. So if you are thinking, well, yeah, I might be interested in applying to Oxford, but let's have a look at what courses they offer. Our course listing can be found on our website, and there's also advice about how to choose what to study. There's quite a good video here which you can use to help you clarify your thoughts about the course that you want to pursue, and it might be that that's a combined subject. The advice that's given here reminds you that there are combination subjects, and also that there are subjects that you might not have really considered or even perhaps heard of because they don't offer themselves until you get beyond A level. So things like archaeology and anthropology, which is a combined subject, biochemistry, human sciences, material sciences might all be things that you wouldn't have ordinarily come across at A level. If we imagine that a student had decided that biochemistry was the subject that she really wanted to study, and she did want to apply to Oxford, and let's say that she did some research, maybe virtual, into colleges, and she really liked the look of Somerville College. She visited their website and liked what she saw. Something that is just worth saying now, and I'll say a bit more about colleges in a second, but every Oxford college will offer many of these courses, but there will be some exceptions. So it's just worth checking on this page here which Oxford colleges offer my course. So that student there is interested in biochemistry. She liked the look of Somerville. Yes, Somerville does offer it. But let's say she'd like the look of archaeology and anthropology. As you can see, fewer colleges offer that subject. So it is worth checking whether a college that you might decide you want to indicate a preference for definitely offers your subject. Most Oxford colleges do offer most subjects. The example of archaeology and anthropology is quite unusual, and that's because it's a smaller subject. But you'll definitely find that most offer most things. So in that case, what's the difference between all these colleges? Well, they are independent little communities, but they all belong to the University of Oxford, and therefore they are all part of that wider community. And it might be that you came on an open day and looked around and thought, well, I like all of the colleges, and I've met nice people at all of them, and I'm doing a course that is offered by the majority of colleges. You might decide you didn't actually want to state a preference for a particular college. You might just want to put in what's called an open application. I want to come to the university. I want to study this subject. I'm happy for the university to allocate me to a college. However, you can indicate a preference, and the university gives some advice about ways of choosing a college or stating a preference. Things to consider might include these factors: the size and age of the college, its location, accommodation that it offers, maybe any particular funding streams or grants that are offered by it, the facilities and access arrangements that the college can offer you. So every college is slightly different, and one of the good ways of helping you to make that decision if you wish to make a preference is to come and visit, and when that's possible again, it could be a nice opportunity to just get a feel for some of the different college sites, meet some of the students there and see if you do want to make a preference. And like I say, just make sure that the college that you decide to choose does offer the course that you're interested in. If you do come on an open day and have a look around, what's nice is that I've used St Peter's here, which is the college I work at, as an example. What's nice is that you can actually have a bit of a poke around. You can have a look in the student room, you can see the dining hall, but perhaps most importantly, you can meet students. This is the Access Rep Nandeepa at St Peter's College. Actually, here we are out at a fair in North London, where Nandeepa is meeting some students and talking to them about Oxford and about considering applying. So chatting to the students, the current undergraduate students, is one of the really nice things that you're able to do when you come on an open day, but it isn't only if you come to Oxford that that's possible. So if you decide that you do like the idea of applying to Oxford and that you think you know what subject you wish to apply for, you might be starting to wonder, well, what are they looking for? What are tutors going to expect of me? One thing to say is that they are honestly not looking for geniuses who have only ever scored top marks in every test they've ever done. What they're looking for is a number of things that, if you break them down, are all actually things that you should be able to demonstrate with real confidence if you meet the subject requirements. So if we look at the subject requirements for a particular course, let's say we're going to look at chemistry. So you can see here that the Department of Chemistry explains what their admissions criteria are, and they talk about the specific types of ability. and then the educational achievement that they generally expect. So if they mention that a standard conditional offer at present is A star, A star, A, that's giving an indication of what is typical as an offer. What they say is required is 3 A levels, which must include chemistry and maths, and you should probably be expecting to get grades that are in this region. If we look at English, you can see here that they give information about the different parts of the application and what they will be looking for. And that includes what they're hoping to see from you in the written work, a little bit about the ELAT, and a little bit about what to expect in the interviews. So what's going to be shown by your application is that you have the academic potential to succeed. And that really doesn't mean that you will necessarily have a clean sweep of all the highest grades at GCSE, but it does mean that you are showing in what you've written in your personal statement, in what you are predicted in your A-levels, and in what your school or college is saying about you, that you have the potential to really thrive in the academic environment at Oxford. Interest in and suitability for this course means that you are really interested in this course. So if it's Oxford or Cambridge, it means that you really know about the course that they offer, not just the subject in the general sense, but in the particular programme that you would be studying at that institution. An ability to think independently and critically, so that's you being able to show the tutors that you don't just absorb information, you consider it, you evaluate it, and you perhaps challenge it, that you expand the way you think about things beyond what's immediately presented to you, and that you're curious and questioning. And motivation and commitment is really important because Oxford, particularly because at Oxford and Cambridge, the terms are really short. The Oxford term being short, it's 8 weeks, means that the studying that you do is quite packed in, and actually students manage to do so much that is not studying in those 8 weeks. They will be doing societies and committees and sports and drama and politics, charity work, all kinds of things that are not to do with their studies. So it's not that you're working the whole time at all, but it does mean it's quite a full-on schedule, because in 8 weeks you're packing in quite a lot of studying and quite a lot of having fun. So they just need evidence that you are motivated and committed enough to balance all those commitments. Now, these 3 here, you might be thinking, well, how do I show these? How do I show that I'm really interested in this course, that I can think independently and critically, and that I'm really genuinely motivated? Where do you show them? Well, personal statement is probably the first and most useful way to try to demonstrate that. And the personal statement is a document that you might feel carries quite a lot of pressure, because it's not going to be huge. It's probably going to be about 500 words long, when you bear in mind these constraints that UCAS put upon you. UCAS say it can only be this many characters, that many lines, and you can only have one of them. And if you are invited to an interview at Oxford or Cambridge, you might be expecting that what you write in that personal statement may come up in discussion. So that could all seem like quite a lot of pressure on this one document. The University of Oxford gives advice, which you can have a look at here, about the personal statement, and it tells you that it's considered as part of your application. It tells you a little bit about what the Oxford tutors are looking for, makes some suggestions about where to start. One thing I'll show you here, should I include extracurricular activities? The suggestion is that you focus around 80% of your personal statement on your academic interests, abilities and achievements. This can include discussion of any relevant extracurricular activities. So the advice here is that maximum 20% should be about things that are not to do with your academic studies or things directly related to them. So only 20% at most should be spent on talking about things that are not really directly relevant to your subject. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be writing about things that go beyond your A-levels. And the difference between extracurricular and supercurricular is that supercurricular activity is stuff that relates directly to your A-level subject. So it might be podcasts that you've been listening to or radio shows that you've been tuning into. It might be books, e-zines, articles that you've been reading. It might be TV programs or YouTube channels that you've been watching. It could be people that you've been following in your particular field. It could be things you've been trying out yourself, problems you've been setting yourself. It could even be things you've been making, like creative projects. All of these things relate in some way very fundamentally to the A-level subject that is the one that you essentially wish to pursue, or indeed to the subject that you're going to be applying for. So the idea of supercurricular activity is that it is demonstrating that you are taking the foundation that's been built by your A-level studies and expanding on that in interesting and independent and stimulating ways. And all of this I've tried to just give a few suggestions of on this page here. Most colleges at Oxford are putting together a similar sort of page to this. So if you have a look on this page, there's some advice and some videos and some suggested links for wider reading. There's subject-specific links here for the core subjects. There's also a reminder about the podcasts that every department at Oxford University has, which could make for some interesting listening. And also the University of Oxford itself has a page where every subject can be clicked on to access some tips and advice about where you could be reading or listening or exploring more widely. So do have a look at that as well to get you started. Using examples that you would find on this page here, just to illustrate maths, for example, these are all things that you could be looking at and exploring, thinking about, discussing with friends, possibly discussing with a teacher, ways that a maths student could be stretching her or himself beyond the syllabus using YouTube, Tom Rock's Maths. This is a project that's being run at St John's College, Oxford, which is about doing weird and wonderful things in the world of maths. Bletchley Park has lots of coding activities and resources. Radio 4 has some programmes about the history of maths. You've got mind-blowing TED Talks in maths. So these sorts of things would be examples of the kind of stuff you could be doing that could then feed into a personal statement. So you could be writing about things that piqued your interest in any of these media, and what you did with that, you know, what it made you go away and try out yourself, what you've discussed with other people and how you've challenged yourself to try to crack some of these codes, or question or challenge some of the received wisdom that you think has that is coming across in some of the talks you're listening to. Just to illustrate the point with a different example, if you were interested in taking your studies of Spanish further, for example, now could be a great time to be watching YouTube channels with Spanish language broadcasts, following the Spanish news, maybe in Spanish, and thinking about current affairs in Spain, and possibly researching the art and culture of Spain, maybe planning a trip or a virtual trip, maybe looking at some of the cultural resources that are available to view digitally and online that relate to Spain and Spanish culture. Reading some classic Spanish literature and maybe some more modern Spanish literature, watching Spanish movies or programs maybe without the subtitles, and these could all start sparking off avenues that you think you might want to explore further, which you could then write about in a personal statement. So hopefully, just to go back to where we started with these deadlines, what that would mean is that by the time you get to thinking about your personal statement and the whole application needing to be submitted by the 15th of October, you will feel really comfortable with providing a lot of content that is about academic thinking you've been doing in that personal statement. Some of it about what you've been studying in the classroom, but a lot of it about studying and thinking that you've been doing outside the classroom and independently. So this was really just to give you some suggestions about ways that you might want to be starting to use your time now to prepare yourself for making competitive university applications in the autumn. If you have any questions about anything that I've mentioned here, like I said at the start, I'd be really delighted to chat. So please do just email me. And the links at the bottom are a reminder of where you can find out more in relation to some of the resources that I've signposted earlier. So I hope to hear from you soon. All the very best of luck with applications, and look forward to meeting you at some point.